So I'm going to say hi and welcome to the Adversity Psychologist Podcast. Oh, literally, it's 2025. It's the beginning of the year. I love recording new episodes. So this morning we got a really meaty but really absolutely much needed subject. So I'm going to introduce my guest. I have Dr Momotaj Islam with me, who is a clinical psychologist and an author. Would you like to say hello? Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what's brought you on today. And Happy New Year as well.
Oh, hello, Tara. Happy New Year, and hello to everyone else. So my name's Dr Momotaj Islam, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I qualified as a clinical psychologist in the year 2000, which, just thinking about it right now, is like a quarter of a century ago. Wow. And I like saying things like that, actually, because I think, you know, I want to kind of give that message that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about age and
Absolutely.
how old we are, because I think it expresses our experience and how far we've come as well. So in that time, since 2000, I've worked mostly in the NHS in secondary care settings. And I've also been supervising trainees, like most of us do. And I've been teaching on postgraduate courses at universities. I was an IAPT, university-based IAPT supervisor, IAPT training on a IAPT training course. And I've had my own practice for the last 11 years. And more recently, I've been working as a consultant with a digital health tech company as well. And now, of course, I've just written a book.
Yeah, and just throw that in there, just unwritten a book as well. Yeah. We're going to come on to your digital stuff hopefully at some point with another episode as well, aren't we? Because that is super interesting for me. But I want to delve straight in. So you've written a book, which is kind of what's led you on and the topic today. Tell us a little bit about your book and kind of what led up to writing it as well.
Yeah. Well, I think I've always, like most people, I've always thought I'd like to write a book one day, but I never thought it'd be on menopause, of course, when I was like in my 20s. That kind of came about because the Association of Clinical Psychologists put out an email looking for people to write books on lived experience of different conditions and so on. Yes. I think you've had Sarah Swan on before. And so it started with her, and she wrote about coping with breast cancer. And then the idea was that other psychologists might want to write about other topics. So I saw that email and I kind of thought, well, I don't really know what my lived experience is, but I was going through the menopause pretty badly at that time. And I thought, well, this is quite an experience. And obviously it's not a mental health condition or, disease or anything, but it was having a big impact on my life. So I just suggested that as a topic for a book. And they liked it, Sarah as a series editor and the publishers. So then I put in my, I wrote what I'd like to write about and so on, and it got accepted. And then suddenly I thought, oh my God, I'm going through all these symptoms of menopause, especially brain fog. And then I've just offered to write a book, So it felt a bit scary at first, really daunting, and I nearly changed my mind. But then I thought, no, I'm just going to go for it. I think I was feeling courageous. So that's how it came about.
I really do.
Yeah, what's that?
I like the fact that you lent into that and were able to go, because the brain fog, and that we'll come on to it, that's all part of menopause, and how many people may just back away from doing things. So I love the fact that you just hit it head on and went, I'm going to do this book, let's get it out.
Yeah. And it was challenging, the process, because of the brain fog, I think, because I was thinking sometimes you can't even string a sentence together because you can't remember a word that in meetings, I'd want to say something, but then I'd have to think of something simpler than what I want to say because I couldn't think of the word. Especially at that time, I was consulting with a digital tech firm, and we were developing an app. And so I was the expert psychologist. I was the chief psychologist for this company. So when we went for pitching meetings, they'd be turning to me. And then there were times when just basic psychological terms, I was like, oh God, this is my bread and butter and I can't think of it. And it was so frustrating. So then I thought, if I'm like that, how am I supposed to write a book? That's just loads of words. And, so it was, there were times and I was like, I'm not sure I'll be able to do this. But I think the thing about menopause and symptoms that I talk about in the book, and I can talk about more, is that your symptoms are always fluctuating. So it's like I didn't have brain fog the whole time. I'd have periods of hot flushes being the worst thing, and then I'd have periods of the brain fog being really bad. Then you'd have periods of something else. So they come and go all the time. They're fluctuating. So I think that's what made it okay, really. So and it also, talk about self-compassion. So being kind to yourself about when you're going through some of the more difficult times as well.
Huge advocate of that, because I was going to say as well, when you're looking at your baseline, so as a psychologist, someone who's used to being able to think on the go and formulate, deal with risk and crisis and all the things that can come our way, it's just what it's like to then suddenly go, I don't have access to that quick thinking that I had, or as you said there before, terms that you're really familiar with, suddenly it's really hard to reproduce those. And kind of what that's like, because again, we'll come on to this as well, but the kind of, we want to talk about the fact, menopause isn't a mental health condition, but it can impact your emotional well-being, and I'm thinking as well, things like sense of self and your self-esteem. There's so much. So how did you structure the book? Because that will also tie nicely with what we talk about on the podcast. Where do you start, especially when you're coming from lived experience, which I love? So it's not just this kind of rote-learned medical terminology. It's what is it like for, an academic, intelligent individual to be dealing with this? How did you begin to structure the book for those people that might want to read more?
I think that was probably the hardest thing to grasp at the beginning, especially as a psychologist, because obviously we're used to listening to other people's stories. We're not used to telling our stories. And that whole idea of self-disclosure, how much of your experience, of yourself do you share? So that was a whole big hurdle to get over. And as authors of this Coping With series books, we were meeting regularly and talking, and that was usually the biggest topic, how much do you disclose? So, but once I got used to the idea, I think the way we saw it is like we kind of like just write down everything and then think about what you take it, leave in and take out, that kind of idea. So the lived experience, to me, I wanted to make sure that I gave people an idea of what it is like on a day-to-day basis, because it's one thing reading a whole load of symptoms, these are all the symptoms you could experience, but it's another thinking about what is it like living with that day to day. So I actually put in my book, there's a part of a chapter, a day in the life of a working mom kind of thing. So a good day and a bad day, I describe those. And then what I've done is in each chapter on the symptoms, I've got a section called My Meno Moments. So what I do is write anecdotes of those symptoms and how I've experienced them. And they came about really, I tend to be someone who, I don't do like thorough journaling. I've never been disciplined enough to do thorough journaling. I've got so many, I was thinking actually, I've got so many holiday journals that I've started and never finished. You go away on holiday and think, right, I'm going to write.
I have that pile of shame, I call it, where I feel guilty sometimes if I started. A bit like the books, academic books I haven't read either.
So I've got lots of little notebooks where I've like, right, I'm going to write lots of notes on this holiday. And I think I'll probably do day 1 and 2, and then that's it, because you get too busy enjoying the holiday, you don't want to write about it. So, but with what I did with the menopause symptoms, and I am naturally someone who tends to write down how I'm feeling about things, and so I just used my phone, and then I just wrote little notes in my phone, in the notes in my phone, and I called those Meno Moments. So when it came to the book, I went back over those and thought, well, which bit represents brain fog, which bit represents, hot flushes and so on. So I put those as the experiences, because I wanted people to see the actual experience of it, and little examples of what it's like living with these symptoms and having these symptoms. And also giving the hope that actually you do cope, you do get through these things, and there are ways. So then what I've done is talked about psychological tools that I've used. So that's what these books are about. It's about clinical psychologists and how they've used their knowledge and awareness of psychological tools in managing different situations. So I used those strategies that I've used. And for me, I've also added, because for me, faith is an important part of me, my lived experience. So I've included that. So, I mean, I specialize in CBT, and I use ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, in my work. But I also use my faith in my everyday practice. And I find ACT and my faith, being a Muslim, Islamic beliefs, actually go hand in hand. They overlap so much in terms of like acceptance, gratitude, all those things. So I've used those strategies. So then I wanted to write about that because it is my lived experience I'm writing about. I mean, obviously other people might not have a faith, or they might not be spiritual. It doesn't matter. It's what you use to manage your situation. So the way I've written it, it's my lived experience, but if someone doesn't have a faith or are not spiritual, they can ignore that element of it, and then they can, use the ACT approach that I've put in. So I've taken a kind of biopsychosocial approach to menopause, because like we've said, it's not a disease, it's not a mental health condition. So I don't want to use a medical model.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to use a medical model, and I didn't want to pathologize it in any way, but I just wanted to show how you can use psychological tools to cope with these everyday kind of situations. And the other thing I did was, at the end of each chapter, I wanted to model gratitude. The little gratitude exercise we do, like think of three things at the end of think of three things at the end of the day, that you're grateful for. Little things, big things, it doesn't matter. So I've described that in the book, and then I wanted to model it. So what I did at the end of each chapter, I kind of mention the key points in that chapter, and then I do a little box of my gratitude, 3 points of gratitude. That's related to that chapter. And so then I give people a space to write their own little gratitude points at the end of that chapter as well,
which I love. Is that kind of old school? Still got my Christmas pen, but they're making purposeful marks on paper. So fabulous.
I'm someone who still loves paper books. I know there are all sorts of digital things, but I still like to connect. I like to connect with a book, and I like written notes as well. So I suppose it's presenting me as I wanted to represent me, my personality, how I would do things, and I know people might do it differently, but that's just how I wanted to present it.
Do you know what I really love about the ACT approach to this is that I'm of a certain age where I've got to start thinking about menopause, and sometimes I find myself almost having a bit of like freeze of, if I start thinking about it, what's it going to mean, and a little bit almost that kind of doom scrolling type metaphor of it's going to be too overwhelming. And I wonder if that's why a lot of women, have spoke to some of my friends about this, that sometimes then you pull away from wanting to start to read something in case it all gets too much. But what I really love is the thing about your book is that breaking it down to those small manageable chunks so it's not overwhelmed, but also just bringing you back to the moment of what am I grateful for. People might go, well, why does that need to be in a book around menopause? But I can't say how strongly most clients I work with can get really hooked on the future, and this is how everything's going to be, the kind of hopelessness and the negative element. But having something to bring you back now to go, okay, today may have been tough, I may have had hot flushes, I may have really struggled in a meeting to say something I really wanted to say, but what am I grateful for? Coming back to that moment, just I don't know if that's your kind of take, that reducing the overwhelm or the pressure to deal with menopause, as you say, this tick box. And there are some fantastic celebrities talking about menopause, but I still think there's a lot of pressure to do it a certain way. And I still think it's quite medicalized, even within social media. So I like your approach to it. I really do.
I'm hoping it's a slightly different approach, in the sense that yes, there are lots of books on menopause out there, and I'm not saying one's better than the other. I think you find what works for you, and I think that's my approach to the whole thing. I mean, it can be a bit divided out there at the moment in terms of pro HRT, pro CBT, and there've been lots of discussions, especially with the last NICE guidelines. There've been lots of discussions about HRT versus CBT and so on. And I think I'd rather not get involved with that. I think it's it's about making it accessible, as much accessible to as many people as possible, and then people choosing what works for them. So for me, the psychological approach is what works for me, and that's what I'm promoting. That's my area of expertise. So I wouldn't want to get involved with the medical side of things. I mean, it is a physical condition, it's a physical experience, changes in physiology, but a lot of our things that are changes in physiology involve a psychological approach to it. We need to think about how we approach it. And, like lifestyle changes and so on, lots of physical health conditions are better managed with lifestyle changes, aren't they? So, we can't ignore those, even if we think about the medical side of it. So
they're often so accessible to people as well.
yeah.
And is it all right to delve into that a little bit? I know there is kind of a lot of politics and some been heated discussions out there and social media, but for you, what is it about CBT that can be useful with your kind of clinical experience?
I mean, it's interesting. I wanted to pick up on the point you said about what's this doing in a book on menopause. So, it's about gratitude. And I've even mentioned in my book, because it just reminded me, you saying that, about visiting a cemetery. And I was thinking, people might think, why is a psychologist saying go and visit a cemetery? But that is to do with, if you read in the book, about gratitude and how humbling that is and how that makes so it's not all more, it sounds morbid, but to me it's not. I think it can actually be a hopeful thing to do, a motivating thing to do.
And so if anyone's listening to this podcast that's new to psychologists, because I've realized I found my maybe comfort zone after 25 years or so of practicing, is that sometimes we do come across with these metaphors and concepts that I'm sure people just go, really? But bear with us. That, if you say, you may read a book, listen to us on social media, whatever, and kind of go, really? And sometimes it makes me go, really? But stuff works.
That's it. That's I thought. Someone might say, why is a psychologist telling me to visit a cemetery? But if you read about ACT approach and so on, you'll understand. And so CBT to me is a very practical approach. It's a very here and now kind of approach. Although I think maybe too much these days people focus on just the practical. It's not just a cookbook of tools. It's about understanding where things come from as well. So I like to always mention that when I do my supervision of IAP trainees, I make sure I kind of let them realize that they need to think about it, the developmental side of things too. Where do things come from? So I'm not just saying it's just a cookbook of tools. But I think,
is it all right to say, because I think that's the stuff that gets confused out in social media, that people, and that's some of the arguments that I've seen, that people saying, I'm, doing these quick fix tools is not going to deal with what's happening with my body. And that is not what CBT for menopause is about. So I'm so glad you brought that in.
Yeah. So it's not about that. It's about thinking about how you manage things and how your thinking process is linked to your behavior, and then how that has an impact on how you feel. So, and of course, CBT can use for all areas of life. And it has actually been proven to be effective for hot flushes by Professor Myra Hunter in her studies that she's done. But I think it can go beyond hot flushes. So I think it's about taking a practical approach to the skills that we learn in CBT are things like record keeping, for example. So in my book, the book is very practical. It's got lots of practical tools. So I provide lots of charts that you can fill in. So activity schedules and keeping a track of your menopausal symptoms, a food diary, sleep diary, all these kind of practical things. So those are the CBT elements
as well, though, isn't it? So really across the board, which I love.
Yeah. So I've tried to cover all, I mean, obviously I haven't covered the medical side of things, but I've tried to cover all the symptoms that can be looked at in a psychological way. So sleep obviously is a big one. And we've got CBTI for that as well, but there are like sleep hygiene kind of issues. And then I've brought in the ACT approach, the acceptance, the, gratitude, self-compassion. And there are lots of exercises, practical exercises such as relaxation and breathing exercises, but also like grounding, imagery, a soothing hand exercise. Mindfulness exercise. So I've tried to put in lots of the practical. So it's packed with lots of and I was actually thinking, because it's funny, yesterday someone sent me a picture of she'd got my book. And then she was about to sit down and read it. And then she said, oh, I've just put the kids to bed, about to read your book, but someone's beating me to it. And she sent me a picture of her husband sitting there reading the book.
I love that.
And I was like, yes, great. Brilliant. And she said, oh, I think he's enjoying it. He's sitting there, he's not giving it back to me. So I actually said, although he might not obviously it's good that he wants to know about menopause, but a lot of the tools in there anybody can use, not necessarily because obviously I've related to menopause because it's a menopause book, but I said, oh, he can use those tools as well, So she says, oh, I might not ever get this book back then.
But you know what I also love? If that you're having a really, a difficult time with symptoms, that you've got then a significant other who might also be able to help you to implement and kind of go, what might be helpful here? What do we need to do? What's not helpful? And I also love, come back to your point earlier, that you're kind of all about a really person-centered approach, that having that many tools and things in there is about people then finding their fit of what works for them in your book.
Exactly.
Not a kind of one size fits all, that kind of rote learned. I love that. But, so whether you're listening to this podcast on a train, walking along, whatever, hopefully there are guys and girls reading this, listening to this, but also that perhaps that might start some conversations around what's helpful. Compassion that can come from partners or loved ones, significant people in people's lives as well, which I love.
Yeah, and you mentioned how it impacts your self-identity. So I've done a chapter on how it impacts your self-identity and how it impacts relationships as well. Yes. And that, again, the idea of self-compassion, but also compassion for each other, empathy for each other, and especially because I think by the time you're menopausal, you might have been in a long-term relationship, or you might be in a new relationship, but we've all got history, haven't we, whichever relationship we're in, and that the age that we've built up. So there'll be experiences where you kind of do need to be empathic of each other. And although we might be going through menopause, your other half might also be going through things. So that kind of shared empathy, I've discussed as well, that need for understanding what each other's going through. I think
which
it's really
can
important.
kind of help with, fractures in relationship, conflicts, all the other, because sometimes you're parenting, you're supporting elderly relatives, there's so much other things that we might be giving our time to, as well as dealing with what we're going through in our bodies as well.
And as parents, you mentioned parenting, but I think children also need to know about menopause. I think
that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's according to their age, of course. So, explain, because I think if mum, depending on the age of your children, they still need to understand what's happening with mum, and explain according to their level of understanding. But obviously, if they're young children, you just do it simply. But as teenagers, for example, you could probably explain more. And I talk about how the flow of hormones with teenagers and menopausal mum can be a bit of
a perfect combination, isn't it? It's one of life's little treats.
Exactly. So that's something to think about as well. And I think if you explain to older children, they can understand better rather than thinking, mom's gone mad, that's what somebody that has,
if you're having a snap and you've got a teenager who's like a purple minion, and I have one of those at times, where you've got those two forces clashing, you're short-tempered, you're dealing with your body at the same time as you have this little mini adult who has all of their stuff going on, and it's like two planets colliding at times, isn't it?
And I think if you've got a daughter, I think that's one of the things I thought about is if you're menopausal, you're going through a lot of changes that you might be reflecting about, and then you've got a daughter who's kind of just a teenage daughter who's flourishing and so on, and you feel like you're losing things, your looks, whatever. That can be something difficult to negotiate and think about as well and reflect on. And I don't know, it might have an impact on the relationship, it might not, but it's something to be aware of. So again, from a psychological perspective, those are things to think about. And I think, so although we don't treat menopause in the clinic room yet, I think one of the things that I've realized as I've learned more and more about menopause is how before I wasn't aware of men I was going through. And that's actually, I didn't say that at the beginning, but a lot of women don't realize they're in perimenopause until I didn't realize until I was a good few years into it. So then I wouldn't have realized what was going on with me, never mind what's going on with my clients of menopausal age. And so the fact that I've now become more aware means that I can think about it more and become more aware of and be more aware, if it's presenting in the room. Not that that becomes the topic of our discussion, but it's just having that awareness really of what else might be going on. And so these kind of issues about family and, identity and so on, if it comes up with a woman who might be of menopausal age, that gives me something to think about and maybe, maybe put forward if it's appropriate. But before, I wouldn't have been aware of that because I didn't even realize I was going through it myself. It's like when I had
and I think as well, a lot of the coverage recently has made me bring it into the clinic room a lot more in all sorts of ways, which I wouldn't historically have done. Unless someone perhaps had brought it up with me. So I think that's really important. So maybe there's something for other clinicians to take away from this discussion as well.
Yeah, hopefully. I think, so it's that overall awareness, I think, that we all need as clinicians, as women ourselves, but with our partners as well as our families. And I think that will help all round in terms of the management of it as well.
So I love the fact we're kind of busting those myths around CBT, because the kind of danger zone, social media can be so useful in so many ways, but the danger zone is it can be quite divisive. So there might be people who will just blanket, and I've seen this in the media, not even looking at CBT or psychological interventions because I have read these things. So what's really good is to have a nice, healthy, balanced, research-based discussion around these things, and somebody listening to this might be able to then go, right, actually, you know what, I'm going to read more about this, I'm going to read this book, see what so you can make informed choices for yourself. Because one of the hard things about menopause is it is something that all women go for, so it's not in our control. So what can be really helpful, and that's very act-based stuff, isn't it, is what is in our control, how much information we digest, the quality, the sources, and then what we want to do with that in terms of helping.
I would definitely say, look at the quality sources, do your research, because especially with social media, there's so much out there. It can be really confusing, and a lot of it can be divisive, conflicting, misinformation, all that. So you really do need to check your sources. And, so I would say, look at the NHS websites, look at British Menopause Society website, rather than influencers. Just so that you get the right information. And you will also see influencers saying, the BMS and not correct, whatever. So you have to decide really who you trust at the end of the day. But I think,
but it's knowing that you can, I think, is important, because some people think, I've seen that and that's it, and that must be the only source of information. And it's, I guess, just being kind to yourself as well, because if there is that brain fog, maybe it's harder on some days to digest information, process it, weigh it up, decision make. Sometimes we might get anxious or overwhelmed with what we're reading and don't really know what to do with that. And that's what I love about your book, is it's almost like this kind of nice comfort blanket helping you through, but nice.
I hope so.
I hope chunks. So. That kind of menopause comfort blanket, I've kind of nicknamed it. One of the things that you talk quite a lot about, and we had a really interesting discussion, we should have recorded our phone call, our kind of pre-podcast discussion I found so interesting, is attitudes to age and menopause, and how that kind of comes into your work in the book as well. It's something we all go through. We're getting better at talking about it, but there's still a lot of stigma and shame, and that can impact women.
I think I did actually do. So I think maybe that's because it's me that wrote this book, as in my ethnicity and culture and so on. So I've I've grown up here, so I've always obviously straddled two cultures, and I'm probably more British than I am Bengali, but I think I'm probably half of half. But so I've always been interested in, well, how would so and so look at it, and how do they look at it here? And so with the menopause. That's why I suppose it came up as a topic for me to think about different cultures and approaches to it from different cultures. So first of all, I looked at the studies that are out there looking at ethnic and cultural differences. And there's something called the SWAN study, which I think is, what is it called? Study of Women Across the Nations. And that started in the 1990s in America. And so they looked at different ethnic groups in the States to look at differences in menopausal experience. And what they found is there are actual differences in the way women experience menopause, and even when they reach the age at when they reach menopause and so on. And that's an ongoing project, and there's thousands of studies that have come from that. But one of the things I picked out is that they obviously because they looked at ethnic groups in the States, it didn't include South Asian women, which is what I am, and But there are British studies that have started, looked at that and also found differences. So where were we going? It was about
it was that kind of attitudes to
attitudes,
aging
yes,
and menopause itself as well.
Yeah, so there you go. I had a bit of brain fog just then.
Life in action.
Out now. I'm actually
it's also Friday.
So what they have found actually in the study is your attitude does make a difference to your experience. And they've found that actually societies that have a negative attitude towards aging and women's aging and loss of fertility and so on have a worse experience of menopause than societies where aging is kind of seen as a point of wisdom and, having a status in society. And I felt that. So I've again, going back to lived experience, this is where I've seen a difference in the different cultures that I've grown up in. So in my culture, growing up, I always saw my grandmother as this kind of this figure that had status, and I always used to see grown men who would respect their mother enough to always be asking their advice for things. So I saw my father asking my grandmother for advice about, what should we do about this? What should we do about that? He didn't always like what she said. She was quite a forceful figure, actually. And they clashed, but he would never not ask her because she had that after, obviously, my grandfather wasn't around then. And so he, being, as the male, he probably would have taken priority, but that's another issue. But she was that figure and so I grew up with that. And so there wasn't this negative attitude towards women and aging. You had a position of respect as you aged. And I think that's probably what's given me this idea that I've always wanted to be older. Actually, this is the age I feel I've always wanted to be. In my 50s, and I love it. And I think I've never felt like, aging means losing my looks, losing my fertility, I've never seen it as loss. I've seen it as gains,
aren't they? Yeah.
And I've seen, so they have shown that actually the societies, and I think in British society seems to be worse than even some European societies where they actually look at women, older women, with more respect and so on. So I think we need to change that a little bit. And that's sort of what worries me a little bit about, again, I don't want to get into politics, but one of the things that worries me about this very medicalized approach to menopause and HRT for everyone, for example, is it's almost, I feel, feeding into the ageism thing. Like, I don't, because HRT will make me feel 30 again. And I just think, well, why do I need to feel 30 again? Why is it not okay to be 50, 55, 56, or older, and thrive in that? So so this is why I think we need to change the attitude, which is why when I started, I said, oh my gosh, I've been a psychologist for a quarter of a century, but so what? I'm proud of that. And I don't, so I've never minded mentioning my age. I've never hidden my age to anyone, I just think, so I think the society we grew up in makes an impact on our attitude in life. And then it's been shown in studies that actually our attitudes and our perspective makes a difference to our experience in menopause. And I'm sure with other health conditions.
So interesting, because I wonder, do you think it also potentially then might transit? So if a woman's listening to this who's starting to notice symptoms, or might already know she's in perimenopause, or might even be already know that she's in full menopause, is that if there is always that kind of attitude there around, this is not a good thing, or this is the end of the road for a certain kind of lifestyle. I mean, can that maybe be a barrier to people wanting to seek support? Do some people just almost kind of back off? I wonder if there's anything that kind of relates, whether your attitude then impacts how you manage and how you read up on how you cope.
Do you mean would people give up then if they had the attitude that they've come to the end of the road?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there can be more of a defeatist type attitude. If you've kind of grown up in a society and culture that kind of pigeonholes women of a certain age, whether it may lead to more defeatist type attitudes, whether people don't want to proactively look more at their bodies and how they cope, whether they move away from maybe some of their value-based living because of menopause, and how that book may help them potentially get back in touch with what's important and how to navigate.
I suppose it depends on your personality, doesn't it, really? And if you're, I think you could, I suppose you're talking about a hopelessness. You can develop a sort of hopelessness. Yeah. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with my book, is actually create hope, and empowerment. I think, because a lot of it's about educating yourself, because if you educate yourself, you feel empowered, don't you? And I think the empowerment of actually there is something I can do, there is something I can do about this. There are ways that I can find around this. So that helps you not kind of surrender to it, like, there's nothing I can do, I might as well just give up and hide away somewhere. The point,
I wonder if that happens in the medical consultation room. If you've got somebody who's got that kind of lack of hope, what's the point, may just then not feel that they can have a discussion with their GP about alternatives to HRT or what else they can have access to. And sometimes we might find ourselves, I kind of call it that conveyor belt, where we're just kind of going along and with what we expect to happen. And it's saying what happens to our autonomy and our empowerment about our own bodies as well,
And I think GPs have a role there then, don't they, to encourage you, motivate you, to tell you what all the options are, And I think with menopause, that's what's been lacking. Obviously now GPs are much more educated on it and they are getting, more training, but historically that's what's been lacking. And I think I've struggled with that with GPs, not, I feel like my GP or consultants that I've seen, gynecologists, could have mentioned perimenopause a lot sooner. They didn't. And even when I was visiting gynecologists nearly 50, it never came up until I found out about this word called perimenopause and mentioned it. And I'm thinking, could you not have even just told me there's this process that leads up to menopause? And not just when I hit menopause. And then even when I've mentioned it, you'd get like, oh yeah, it could be that. And then nothing. I still find, actually, because now I feel like when I go to my GP, well, I'm just as knowledgeable as you probably on menopause. So when I mention, I don't actually expect anything
more so. Like,
and then I feel like there is this kind of sense of, oh, let's not get into that. Like, I still feel that a little bit sometimes when I see my GP, that it's not a big deal, that let's not get into that now. And I think that needs to change, because it is a big part of your life, at this age. And it does have an impact on your life. So at least some encouragement from them of, well, there are these things you can do, or, I know there are now menopause clinics, but it's really hard to get referred to one.
But it's also that I wonder how many people might then just be on a waiting list, or in that kind of loophole of waiting to get a referral, but that there's things you can be also doing to empower yourself and
and that's my point. And even if you are on HRT, you can still use CBT, you can still use psychological tools, and often you still need to, because it's not just a magic pill, and you still need to do the lifestyle stuff, even if you're on HRT or other medication. And that's for other medical conditions as well. You get the medication, but you still need to do the things that keep you well, in addition to the medication too.
It kind of comes back to what you were saying before, that actually people reading your book, it's not just applicable to the menopause, is it? I think a lot of people will take a lot away from the concepts and the understanding. And something that you alluded to earlier, in psychology, we tend to talk about formulation, don't we? It's so important for people to understand what is going on with them, rather than just looking at what I call the doing bit, or the fix bit, because that's where the knowledge, sounds cheesy, but the knowledge is power, isn't it? That's where empowerment comes from. That's where you can know where you have more autonomy in certain areas. It's also can lead to conversations, like we say, with significant others. That's something. And kids, I want to take that away from today as well. I haven't thought about that before, actually, in terms of explaining to, or even wider family members and friends, how do we have those conversations about what's going on from us? We can still be quite private, especially in British culture. You
mentioned formulation. So as psychologists, we love a model, don't we?
Especially if you can draw it out with a pen, like me.
Well, I've done a really simple model actually in the book. So I talked about biopsychosocial and then spiritual. So I've done a little model, again, just to encapsulate. So we're not talking about formulation like we do in terms of mental health conditions, but like you're saying, just to kind of encapsulate that knowledge of what's being experienced here. So I've done what I call my biopsychosocial spiritual model, And that spiritual element, again, it can be faith, but it can just be, I've called it Meno and Me, that section. So it's your identity, your, you know, and your values. So I talk a lot about values, because values is obviously very much part of ACT, but it's also part of faith and spirituality for me. But it doesn't have to be. Your values are whatever you decide your values are. And bringing that in as well, because I think that plays such a big part to how you approach things, going back to perspectives and attitudes, and, you know, approach to coping will very much be connected to your values and how you think something should be managed.
Absolutely.
As well.
That kind of, so time's gone so fast. I'm gonna have to get you back on again, because there's so much more I want to cover. In terms of you hanging about on socials, how can people find out more about you? Where do you hide on social media, website? Because I will make sure that all of this is in the show notes for people, so they can just I'm
really new to social media, so
new world.
Yes, it's very new. I'm on LinkedIn just as my name, Dr Momotaj Islam, and then I've just recently started an Instagram page, which is called Dr M Psychology, because that's my practice is called Dr M Psychological Services. So I've used a Dr M Psychology as my Instagram, what do you call it, handle, whatever the name is.
Tag handle, I don't know. I'm on it and I don't know.
Anyway, if you look up Dr M Psychology and then Dr Momotaj Islam, I've started posting little bits there. Still getting very much getting used to it, really. But yes, and
leaning into it.
Yeah. And so if anyone's got any questions about the book or anything, they can, you know, contact me. I've also got a website, drmpsychology.co.uk.
I'll make sure all of this is in the show notes for people as well, because what that means is they can just click straight on a link, which is much easier than typing it into a browser. And let us know the full title of your book and who it's published by, so people, and where can they find it? Because it's already out, which is fantastic. So congratulations on having your book out there. It's lovely.
Thank you. So yes, it was published on the 10th of December, and it's called Coping with Menopause, Psychological Tools for Navigating the Transition and Living a Balanced Life. And so the balanced life bit is very much where I'm going with it. And it's by Sequoia Books, and it's been done with collaboration with the Association of Clinical Psychologists UK.
It's a great initiative, that, isn't it? Because I've had Yvonne on as well, talking about trauma, and it's really lovely.
There are other books coming out too as well under the same,
which is amazing, same isn't it? I'm gonna have to hoover them all up and get them on, because what I love is that lived experiences meet psychology and the wonderful hybrid that creates. And I love this movement. We haven't touched on it, but this new movement of, when I trained, it was very much, you don't talk. I'm bringing this more and more into the podcast about you. Almost you have to be this like robot in front of the person, and that's starting to shift. And obviously, you know, as people who have one-to-one clinics, we have to be very careful about what and how we share. But I love this movement now of kind of moving away from us just being these robotic clinicians to humans who have experiences. I absolutely love that. And I think people could take a lot away.
Hopefully that makes us more relatable, and we can connect better with people, and just be the humans that we are, just like everybody else is, and experiencing the same things that everyone else is as well.
We're human beings. So where can people buy it? Where is it available from?
So it's available through Sequoia Books. I can send you the link, and we are able to offer a 25% discount at the moment. So you just need to use the code Momotaj25. So that's my name. And so you can put that link in. And also I think it's on Amazon Books and other bookshops as well.
Fantastic. I hope it does super well. It needs to.
Thank you.
And congratulations on getting it out there. It's no easy thing, sitting, writing, getting a book out.
Yeah, I know you've done a book recently as well, haven't you? So congratulations to you too.
Thank you. It's a lovely thing to do, isn't it? But it can take a lot as well. So
I've enjoyed it. I've already started thinking, oh, what else could I write? And I've enjoyed it. Yeah. But like I said, menopause wasn't the first thing I thought of, so there are other ideas. But yeah, I've enjoyed the whole process.
Do I get exclusive rights to podcasting when you've written your next one?
Yeah, but it is time consuming, isn't it? That's the thing.
It is, yeah. When we come back, we both do a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy, that coming kind of back to your values, and kind of looking at how does that fit in with family stuff and other interests and other work. We all do all sorts of stuff, don't we, in private practice? We dip our toes in areas.
That's what I love about private practice. The freedom to choose what you do. I love it.
And innovation, all about that, taking new concepts and doing new things with them. I love it. Absolutely love it. It's been so lovely. The times just like zoomed by.
It has, gosh.
But what I'm going to do when this episode's out, look at the little areas and little offshoots, because there's so much more I think we can cover around menopause.
Love to,
because it's a great book that I need to now go and read properly. I'll make some targeted time out for myself to read, because I have so many fantastic books from people recently in this pile, and I do need to read them. So I'm starting to try in 2025 is carving time out to read. Slowly and surely.
Oh, another thing I was going to point out. Do you see my little picture at the back?
Yes, love that.
So this is my book cover. And then what I did, because I got someone to paint that for me, and then they did a calligraphy on there for me on the painting. And what that calligraphy, it's Arabic calligraphy, and it means God will never burden a soul more than they can bear. And that was to me, that's the hope in life, that, whatever you're burdened with, that you feel burdened with, you will find a way of coping, and so you just need to trust in yourself, and you need to have faith in when you reach out to others, there will be help there. So I just saw that and realized that was one of the reasons.
Because I was just going to ask, I always do my little signature move at the end of what's the one little takeaway you can give us. That is absolutely it, isn't it? I love that. I love that. You have to put that picture on social media as well, I reckon.
I will. I need to make time to do these things. That was one of the things I was going to share.
If you watch this back, it might be a little reminder when the things have kind of calmed a bit, because when you first have a book out, there's a lot on, isn't there? Thank you so much. It's lovely for me. As we chatted on the phone, on email, but it's so nice to be able to
nice to meet you
almost
too.
Real life, but to talk with an actual human and put a face.
As real as it gets sometimes these days.
Yes, this is it. As real as it. I just live in this little room now, not meeting any actual humans. But thank you. I can't wait to get this episode out there, and I hope that people enjoy it. And please look up Momotaj, look up the work that she does, and make sure you get Coping with Menopause on the bookshelf and on your lap, not just on the bookshelf. Reading it, using it, sharing it with your partners and your family members and your kids as well.
And and it's a paper copy, so it's nice and tangible.
I love a book. I love the smell of them, the feel.
Me too.
I draw all over mine too with my Christmas pen. Nice to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day, and
thank you.
nice to meet you. Take